At 2:15 a.m., as agonizing labor pains surged through my body and my water broke on the hardwood floor, my mother-in-law opened her bedroom door, sneered, and said, "I have a big meeting tomorrow. I need my sleep," before locking herself back inside. I was forced to call an ambulance and endure a dangerous, terrifying emergency delivery completely alone in a cold hospital room while she slept soundly. 1 week later, she walked into my home with a camera crew, demanding to hold her grandchild for social media clout, only for her smile to freeze when I looked her dead in the eye and asked, "What grandchild?" In less than 2 minutes, the legal documents in my hand stripped her of her home, shattered her corporate career, and wiped out 40 years of her family's social standing. My name is Grace Brown. To understand how a woman who spent years being dismissed as a quiet, obedient housewife managed to dismantle her mother-in-law's entire existence in 7 days, you have to look into the vanity-obsessed world of the Brown family. My mother-in-law, Evelyn Brown, was a senior vice president at Pinnacle Crest Consulting, a high-profile corporate restructuring firm in the city. Evelyn was a woman who treated every human interaction as a transactional networking event. She measured people strictly by their zip code, their designer clothing, and their capacity to elevate her social status among the city's elite. My husband, Julian, was a dedicated marine engineer whose job frequently kept him out at sea or on international offshore platforms for weeks at a time. When Julian and I married 4 years ago, Evelyn made no effort to hide her disgust. Because I came from a modest background and worked remotely from my laptop in a cozy home office, Evelyn assumed I was a low-earning, uneducated dependent who was riding her son's coattails. She routinely made passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, forced me to sit in the corner during family holiday dinners, and loudly told her wealthy friends that Julian had married far beneath his station. What Evelyn never bothered to investigate was the true nature of my remote work. I wasn't an entry-level clerk. I was the co-founder and managing partner of Meridian Crest Equity, a discreet multi-million-dollar private investment firm specializing in commercial real estate debt acquisition and corporate lease holdings. I kept my wealth entirely private because I valued a peaceful, grounded life far away from artificial high society drama. For 4 years, I quietly ignored Evelyn's snide remarks, choosing peace over conflict, while observing the rotting, debt-ridden reality beneath her polished exterior. The true nightmare began during the final month of my high-risk pregnancy. Julian had been called away on an emergency engineering contract in Tokyo, leaving him out of cellular reach on a trans-Pacific vessel for 5 days. Because my doctor had flagged potential early labor risks, Julian asked his mother to stay in our guest suite for 3 days until his return, just in case I needed emergency assistance. Evelyn reluctantly agreed, not out of maternal care, but because she wanted to use our luxury suburban home as a convenient base while preparing for the biggest corporate presentation of her career, a pitch to secure the regional presidency at Pinnacle Crest. On a cold Thursday morning, at precisely 2:15 a.m., a sudden, sharp tear ripped through my abdomen. I gasped in pain, sitting up in bed as a warm rush of fluid soaked through the sheets. My water had broken 6 weeks early, and intense, crushing contractions immediately locked my lower body in agonizing paralysis. Terrified for my baby's life, I dragged myself out of bed, holding onto the walls as I staggered down the hallway toward the guest bedroom. I pounded on Evelyn's door with all the strength I had left, crying out through the silence of the house, "Evelyn, please, help me. My water broke, the contractions are continuous, and I can't drive. Please take me to the hospital." The bedroom door clicked open 3 inches. Evelyn stood in the doorway wrapped in a silk robe, her face twisted into an expression of sheer annoyance. She didn't ask if I was okay, nor did she look at the sweat dripping down my pale forehead. Instead, she checked her expensive wristwatch, let out a disgusted sigh, and looked at me as if I were a street beggar bothering her for spare change. "Are you serious right now, Grace?" she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "It is 2 a.m. I have my final regional presidency board meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow. That presentation determines my entire legacy, and I need my full 8 hours of sleep. Call an Uber or an ambulance. Do not ruin my big day with your dramatic panics." Before I could even choke out another plea, Evelyn slammed the door directly in my face and turned the deadbolt lock from the inside. I stood in the dark hallway, clutching my stomach as another violent contraction doubled me over in agony. Tears of pain and sheer disbelief spilled down my cheeks as I realized that this woman was willing to endanger the lives of her daughter-in-law and her unborn grandchild just to get a good night's rest for a corporate meeting. Gathering every ounce of maternal survival instinct, I crawled back to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and dialed emergency services. 15 excruciating minutes later, the flashing red lights of an ambulance illuminated our driveway. As the paramedics wheeled me out of the front door on a stretcher, shivering in terror while oxygen was pressed to my face, I glanced back at the second-floor window. Evelyn's bedroom light remained completely dark. She hadn't even bothered to look out the window. The next 48 hours were a living nightmare. I underwent an emergency cesarean section at the regional hospital, fighting through severe blood pressure drops and surgical complications without a single family member by my side. But God was merciful. My baby girl, Nora, was born breathing, small but fiercely resilient, and was immediately placed in the neonatal intensive care unit under close monitoring. As I lay in that sterile hospital room, hooked up to IV lines and recovering from major surgery, a cold, unshakable transformation took place inside my soul. The naive, forgiving Grace Brown was dead. In her place stood a mother whose protective instincts had turned into a weapon of absolute strategic precision. While resting in my hospital bed over the next 5 days, I opened my encrypted laptop and initiated a thorough, ruthless audit of Evelyn Brown's personal and corporate ecosystem. What I discovered confirmed everything I had long suspected about her fragile life. Evelyn's lavish lifestyle was an absolute illusion. She had taken out a massive, short-term $1.8 million private equity loan to purchase her luxury penthouse in the city center, using her stock options at Pinnacle Crest as collateral. Furthermore, her firm, Pinnacle Crest Consulting, was currently undergoing a high-stakes operational buyout to prevent bankruptcy, and the primary institutional creditor holding their master commercial lease and restructuring debt was none other than my private firm, Meridian Crest Equity. With a few precise keystrokes, I launched a multi-layered financial retaliation. First, I directed my legal team at Meridian Crest to issue an immediate acceleration notice on Pinnacle Crest's commercial debt, citing severe executive liability and ethical breaches by their senior leadership. Second, I bought out Evelyn's personal $1.8 million property loan from the secondary private lender, taking direct ownership of the mortgage deed on her city penthouse. Third, I drafted a comprehensive legal directive establishing that Evelyn Brown had zero parental, legal, or visitation rights to my daughter, instructing hospital security and domestic legal networks that she was strictly barred from ever coming within 500 yards of my child. On day 7, Julian finally landed back in the country. When he turned on his phone and received my messages, he rushed to the hospital in absolute shock, weeping as he held our healthy baby girl in his arms. when I recounted every single detail of what his mother had done at 2:15 a.m., showing him the time-stamped emergency call logs and hospital admission records, Julian's love for his mother dissolved into pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and promised that whatever I chose to do next, he would stand behind me with absolute loyalty. Later that afternoon, I was officially discharged from the hospital. Julian drove baby Nora and me back to our home, ensuring we were settled comfortably in the master suite. At precisely 4 o'clock, a sleek luxury car pulled into our driveway. Evelyn had arrived. She stepped out of the vehicle dressed in a sharp power suit, carrying an expensive designer baby carriage, accompanied by 2 of her high society friends and a professional photographer she had hired to document her moment as a proud elite grandmother. Evelyn didn't even knock. She used her spare key, strutting into our foyer with an air of triumphant arrogance, calling out in a sing-song voice, "Julian, Grace, I'm here. My board meeting went wonderfully, and now I'm ready to present my grandchild to my social circle. Bring the baby downstairs immediately." I walked down the grand staircase slowly, wearing a clean linen dress, my posture perfectly erect, my face completely devoid of emotion. Julian stood at the bottom of the stairs, his arms crossed over his chest, looking at his mother with cold contempt. Evelyn paused, frowning slightly as she noticed the freezing atmosphere in the room, but quickly smoothed her expression into a fake, condescending smile. "Oh, Grace, you're up. Good. Where's the baby? My photographer has a tight schedule, and I want to get the announcement photos posted to my executive profile before dinner." I stepped onto the polished marble floor of the foyer, looked directly into her arrogant eyes, and allowed a calm, icy smile to spread across my face. "What grandchild, Evelyn?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Evelyn's smile faltered, her eyebrows knitting together in annoyance. "Don't be ridiculous, Grace," she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "I know you were upset about last week, but business comes first. I had a monumental career meeting to attend. Now stop being dramatic and bring my grandchild out here right now." "You don't have a grandchild in this house, Evelyn," I said, stepping closer to her. "At 2:15 a.m. last Thursday, when I was bleeding on the floor and begging for help to save my baby's life, you told me that your sleep and your corporate meeting mattered more than our survival. You locked your door and abandoned a helpless child. You made a choice that night. You chose your career over a human life, and actions have absolute consequences." Before Evelyn could scream, I held up a thick manila folder and handed it directly to her high society friends, who opened it in shock. Inside that file is an official legal injunction, a certified copy of the 911 emergency transcript from that night, and a permanent restraining order, I continued, my voice cutting through the foyer like a razor. "You have been legally stripped of any right to ever see, hold, or speak to my daughter. Officially and legally, you are a complete stranger to her." Evelyn's face turned bright red with rage. "You insolent, ungrateful little nobody!" she shrieked, pointing her finger at my face. "How dare you? I am a senior vice president at Pinnacle Crest. You can't keep me from my son's baby. Julian, tell your wife to stop this madness right now." Julian took a step forward, placing his arm securely around my waist, his voice cold and hard as steel. "My wife speaks for this family, Mother," Julian declared. "You left my wife and my daughter to die alone so you could sleep for a meeting. You are no mother of mine, and you will never touch my child." Evelyn gasped, taking a step back as if she had been hit by a physical blow, but before she could regain her footing, my phone chimed on the console table. I picked it up, tapped the speakerphone button, and held it out. The voice of Arthur Vance, the chief executive officer of Pinnacle Crest Consulting, echoed loudly through the foyer. "Grace," Arthur said respectfully, "I am calling to confirm that Meridian Crest Equity has officially executed the loan acceleration. Following our emergency board meeting 20 minutes ago, we have formally terminated Evelyn Brown from her position as Senior Vice President effective immediately due to ethical misconduct and gross corporate liability. Security is currently clearing out her office. Evelyn's phone instantly began ringing wildly in her handbag. Her hands shook violently as she pulled out the device, seeing dozens of urgent notifications flashing across her screen. Messages from her firm's HR department, news alerts, and an automated eviction notice from my real estate division giving her 48 hours to vacate her city penthouse before commercial bailiffs seized the property. The designer baby carriage slipped from Evelyn's trembling fingers, crashing onto the marble floor. Her face drained of every single drop of color, turning a ghastly translucent white as she stared at me in total, paralyzing horror. The woman who had spent 4 years looking down on me as an uneducated nobody finally realized that the quiet daughter-in-law she tried to step on was the sole managing owner of her entire financial life. You own Meridian Crest? Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking into a pathetic, terrified wheeze as she collapsed onto her knees right on my foyer floor. Grace, please, no! You're destroying my life, my career, my home, my reputation. Everything I built is gone. Please, I'm begging you. I'll apologize. I'll get on my knees. Just give me my job back. Let me see the baby. I looked down at the weeping, broken woman kneeling at my feet, completely unmoved by her desperate tears. You worried about your sleep at 2:15 a.m., Evelyn? Now you'll have all the time in the world to sleep. On the streets. Get out of my house. Julian opened the front door wide, and 2 private security officers I had hired stepped into the foyer, firmly grabbing Evelyn by her arms and escorting her out into the driveway alongside her speechless, embarrassed friends. Her hysterical weeping echoed through the quiet suburban neighborhood as her luxury car sped away, leaving her standing on the curb in complete social and financial ruin. The liquidation of Evelyn Brown's public life was swift, merciless, and absolute. Deprived of her executive salary and facing an immediate foreclosure on her penthouse, she was forced to sell off her designer wardrobe and luxury jewelry at a fraction of their value just to settle her legal fees. Within 2 months, she was forced to move into a tiny, rundown, single-bedroom rental apartment on the far outskirts of the county, her name completely blacklisted from every major corporate firm in the state. Her high society friends vanished overnight, her social media clout evaporated, and her desperate letters begging Julian for forgiveness were returned unopened. Meanwhile, our home became a sanctuary of genuine peace, warmth, and unshakable love. Baby Nora grew into a healthy, vibrant, and joyful little girl, surrounded by parents who cherished her safety above all else. Free from the toxic shadows of an arrogant predator, Julian and I expanded Meridian Crest Equity, using our resources to fund regional maternal health initiatives and build free emergency medical transport units for low-income mothers across the state. Walking through our sunlit garden with my daughter held safely in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had protected my child, reclaimed my power, and proven that real strength never needs to roar. It simply waits, plans, and prevails. Educational lesson. This narrative provides a profound lesson on the destructive nature of extreme vanity, transactional empathy, and the fatal mistake of underestimating others based on superficial appearances. When individuals prioritize personal ambition and social status over basic human decency and the safety of a child, they undermine the ethical foundation of their own lives. Arrogance creates a severe operational blindness, leading self-absorbed people to assume that those who act with quiet humility are weak or defenseless. In reality, true power is built on self-control, strategic foresight, and moral clarity. Cruelty toward the vulnerable inevitably triggers systemic accountability, and those who use their position to degrade others will eventually discover that the very people they stepped on hold the keys to their ultimate downfall. Personal advice. If you ever find yourself in a situation where a family member or superior treats your health, your pain, or your child's life with callous disregard, you must instantly cut through the illusion of familial obligation. Do not waste time pleading for empathy from someone who views human suffering as an inconvenience to their schedule. Recognize that your safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Cultivate your independence, build your resources in silence, and establish absolute legal and emotional boundaries that insulate your family from toxic predators. When faced with cruelty, refrain from empty arguments. Instead, rely on calm, calculated, and decisive action to protect your peace. Surround yourself exclusively with people who value your presence, honor your boundaries, and stand by you when life tests you the most.